make our happiness hostage of the fulfillment of the desire. At that moment, no fulfillment, because the desire has lost its purity.
So yeah, I'm just wondering if you could speak on the idea of free will.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about free will, we have to be very clear. We have to know what we are talking about and whose free will or absence thereof we are talking about. You know? So
I guess both. I am wondering, like, from myself, or
yeah, but yourself, you have to be clear what you call yourself.
Yeah.
If what you call yourself is this body, we can ask the question, is this body free? Obviously, it is not absolutely free, because it cannot fly, for instance, right? And also because it is subjected to illnesses, aging, etc. And also because when it moves because we have decided to move in some direction, right? In other words, it is the slave of the mind who seems to be making the decisions, right? So by itself, the body is like a car, but the car is not free to go where it wants to. It is the driver that matters, right? So then, once we understand that, if I call I the body, no, there is no real freedom there. The body is really conditioned. Now, it is conditioned by the thoughts, by the decisions. And now, if we look at the way the decisions happen, they come as thoughts. At the time, right, let's do this, let's raise the arm. At the time of a thought, there is no thinker of the thought. Are you following me? Because consciousness is completely one with the thought. The perceiver consciousness and the perceived, the thoughts, are one. They are indissociable. So the thinker of the thought comes as an afterthought, claiming I, separate entity, whatever it is believed to be a separate entity, created this thought. But this separate entity that claims to be the thinker of the thought itself is an object that appears in consciousness. It is not consciousness itself, whereas in fact it was consciousness that was the thinker. That which is a concept, a belief, an object appearing in consciousness is not the consciousness, and only consciousness thinks. Because decisions, I'm going to your question, because the decisions appear as thoughts, they are a subset of the set of thoughts, it is consciousness that makes the decisions, not a separate entity. So the answer to your question, as a body or as a separate mind, there is no freedom. But on the other hand, you can say, yes, but I feel that there is freedom when I decide. Yes, because at that moment you are free, but as consciousness, you see. So then there is free will, if we call that, or freedom to choose, as consciousness. And actually the move free will means what? It means a will that comes from freedom, right? It's a will that comes, consciousness is freedom. But it may create a will that comes from freedom. It's very different, by the way, from a will that comes from ignorance. And the beauty is that the will that comes from freedom is always fulfilled, always executed, whereas a will that comes from ignorance, no. So this will that comes from freedom is the will of consciousness. It's the impersonal will, if you will. And on that level, there is free will. So freedom is on the level of consciousness, zero freedom on the level of the individual. Whereas most people believe that there is a certain level of freedom, a certain amount of freedom on the level of the individual. For instance, the individual can raise the arm, but it cannot make the clouds move, right? Yeah. So, but that is not true, because it is only consciousness that decides. So our decisions, they come from consciousness, and they are cosmic events, and all events come from this freedom. You see, so it's there is the place of freedom is universal, and that's all I can say now. There is another related question, which is a question of determinism or predestination. And one way to look at it is this, let's look first a very materialist way to look at it. This body is made of matter. Matter is ruled by the laws of physics. The laws of physics are deterministic. Where Mars is going to be in the sky exactly 1 year from now is already decided, already determined. So in this view, according to this perspective, everything that happens in our life is already decided, predetermined. There is no real freedom as a result. If everything is predetermined, there is no freedom. That vantage point somehow grant reality to time and to causation, you see. Another interpretation is time is not real, time gets created. Time is part of the waking dream. Only the dreamer has the freedom. And the dreamer can change the dream at any moment, if we can, at any eternal moment. In other words, because the dreamer can change the dream is not predestined. But what happens in the dream is not decided by the dream itself. It is preordained, if you will, from a different place, which is beyond time. It's hard, very hard to conceive that, because it is preordained from a place which is beyond time, which is at the same time a place of instantaneity and a place of eternity. So we can only understand that through metaphors, like the time in the movie is an illusion. When we watch the movie, the time seems real. But in fact, what we watch, for instance, the various scenes in the movie may have been shot at completely different times, right? And then during the editing process, have been recreated to give a story. So it's the same here. The movie, the time seems real, but it is all preordained from a different place, which is beautiful because we are free, you know. We are free. As consciousness, we are free, and we are consciousness. So there are two kinds of freedom, you know. There is freedom from and freedom to create, like the freedom of the artist, or the freedom of the engineer, the freedom of creation, the freedom of the gardener, right? Freedom from is the first freedom we conquer on the path of jnana, because it's the understanding that what we are is not affected by anything that appears. We are not affected as consciousness by anything that appears in us. We are beyond space, beyond time. We are safe. Freedom from everything that in ignorance seemed to threaten us. Freedom from death, freedom from absolute disappearance, experience of the immortality of consciousness. That's liberation. But then, whatever happens also is the display of our decisions. There is a beautiful, there are several poems by Abhinavagupta. Abhinavagupta lived, I think, in the 16th century, I'm not sure. He was a playwright, I think. He was a poet, and he was also a great grammarian, but he was also a great teacher. And so he wrote poems about the truth. And in one of these poems, there are not too many, perhaps 10. It's like Shankara's poems, there are not too many either. In one of them, he describes the path of knowledge, and he described at the end the life of the jnani, and he says something like, don't remember exactly, so I'm paraphrasing, and now that you have your freedom, enjoy the display of your divine energies. Enjoy the display, the show of your divine Shakti, or of your divine energies. That's a freedom too. Knowing that everything that happens in your creation, and then you have the extraordinary serendipity in your life, that impersonal desires appear out of the blue, you know. I mean, get fulfilled out of the blue. So that's about free will. This and the will, the place of will, of true will, is in consciousness. And then there is manifestation of this will. So the will belongs to the noumenal, because there is no form in the will. and then it manifests as forms. The philosopher Schopenhauer often said that he was reading some Indian texts, so he was a little knowledgeable about the Upanishad and so on. He was interested by that. So basically the only book that he wrote, that he was keeping, working at it, changing things throughout his life. And the title was The World as Will and Representation. So for us, Vorstellung, I think, for us, in fact, if we translate it in more will, that's a consciousness, a noumenal aspect. Representation means, in fact, like a show, you see, like a show means, in fact, the creation, the manifestation. But there is this consciousness and will. There is consciousness, will, and manifestation. I never remember the Sanskrit word, that is echa,
Icha and kriya, I think, right?
echa, right? That is moment when of
Kashmiri Shaivism.
Could you say that again?
It's Icha and kriya. So the 5 aspects, one is Satchit Ananda, Nama Rupa. This is extended in Kashmiri Shaivism, saying that consciousness also has the power to will and act, which is Icha and kriya.
and create, yes.
Cool.
It's this transition, between we can see it in us when we have a desire, because most desires, they are pure in their first moment, in the moment when they are born. And what happens is that then ignorance gets hold of them in the following way. If this desire doesn't get fulfilled, I'm cooked. And in other words, we make our happiness hostage of the fulfillment of the desire. At that moment, no fulfillment, because the desire has lost its purity. It's lost. Because we have made our happiness dependent upon an object. We have lost sight of the fact that the objects are just a celebration of what we are. Something interesting, actually, also a slight distinction between the Tantric Kashmirian path and often some scholastic Advaita path, is that in the Tantric tradition, the manifestation is loved, is accepted, is recognized as being ultimately Shiva, right? So there is no restriction, no going exclusively to the pure consciousness, to the pure Atman, and say, no, Namarupa, not good. We want only Satchitananda. Satchitananda, Namarupa, Kriya Icha, it's one. You have one, you have everything.
So in this case, then let's say let's call consciousness.
Otherwise things are clashing.
I was thinking that too. So in this case, then consciousness, let's say, is choosing ignorance.
Oh yes, it's always consciousness that chooses ignorance, because there is nobody else to choose anything.
So Shiva's potential as ignorance is just as his potential of anything
Yeah,
else.
nobody imposes the ignorance onto Shiva. Nobody imposes anything to Shiva. Shiva chooses to play the game.
So then ultimately then the divine will is manifested as the individual will. It's just an extension, isn't it?
Absolutely. Ignorance is a manifestation of the divine will, and liberation is also the manifestation of the divine will.
Yes, when in cases when consciousness is done, then it's liberated.
Yeah. We know that, and that's a little bit, the thing. We know that as kids, because that the attraction of the forbidden fruit. You see, and as children we know that, don't do that. That must be interesting to do that. There is something to explore there.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And so that's a reflection on the human level of the divine interest of exploring all the possibilities.
So the ego mind, in the way that it's cultivated, we just kind of have deluded ourselves in choosing something that's good and then not so good to be naughty or ignorant, right?
Because we have put in place an entire system whereby we are not lost forever.
But it's liberating, like we're just being bad right now.
Yeah.
So consciousness is being bad right now.
Yeah.
Well, not literally, but...
And also, and that's the reason why, from the vantage point of wisdom, ignorance is not a problem.
No.
Right?
No, it's wonderful.
Ignorance is a problem. So, in fact, if a teacher says to the disciple, oh, I'm going to help you, you are in ignorance, that's bad, that's bad. That's not true. He's just playing good cop with a student, kind of agreeing with him, or with her. Ignorance is not a problem.
So ananda is a feeling. I understand it as a feeling, but let's say if it were a state of realization, would it be akin to enjoying ignorant moments, blissful moments?
Ananda is the enjoyment of consciousness by consciousness. Consciousness is always present. And it's just that some people enjoy, and it's not some people, in fact, it's consciousness also enjoys seeing itself as an object. That's the enjoyment of ignorance. And
it enjoys itself having ignorance at times.
Yeah.
Is that ananda? That enjoyment is ananda? Or is
it's
ananda
a continuation
different?
of ananda. For consciousness, there is only ananda, because consciousness is free, does what she wants, right?
Okay.